On today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by Sam Vecini to talk about Cade Cunningham's season and whether the Detroit Pistons should take their time at the deadline or whether they should make an immediate move for this season. We'll talk about all of that today's episode, Locked On Pistons podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Khahil. You can find me over on Twitter at Khahil. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. We are just 400 subscribers away from 10,000 subscribers. 50% of you guys who listen and watch the podcast are not subscribed. So please hit that subscribe button if you have not already, or you can leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So without further ado, we are joined by Sam Vicini, writer at The Athletic and also host of the Game Theory podcast. Sam, thank you for coming on to the podcast. Let's get right into it. Obviously, the trade deadline, we're recording this on the 4th. The trade deadline is in less than 48 hours at this point. There's been a lot of talk amongst the Pistons community about whether the Detroit Pistons should be patient, whether they should just continue looking forward to the future, or with them sitting in the 7th seed at 25-25, how Cade's played this season, should they look to make a move that will help them more so this year and try to rise up maybe to the 6th seed or the 5th seed? Where do you think the Pistons should go in that direction?
Yeah, look, I would love to see them make a move. I would love to see them be a little bit aggressive and try to consolidate what's been a really excellent leap forward this season, in my opinion. You look at what they've been able to accomplish. They're sitting here as of the time we're recording this at 25-25. I mean, it was funny. I was talking about this with my co-host, Bryce Simon, who Pistons fans will obviously be very familiar with. He has been covering the team for 4 years now, something like that. And they've already won more games this year than at any point in the time that he's been covering the team. So I love the idea of them going out and not like aggressively shopping, going out and being in the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes or anything like that. They shouldn't be trying to, take a massive leap forward. But if a sharp move, not even on the margins, but like a guy who can come in and like potentially be a player that is in closing lineups when the right matchup occurs. Somebody like, for instance, like Lonzo Ball is a name that I've brought up a few times. Like, I really like the idea of them going to get Lonzo Ball being a great defender for a team that has struggled at the point of attack defensively this season. Being just a smart basketball player who cuts really well. I think he'd have great synergy with Cade Cunningham. Can also handle the ball a little bit to help make up for Jaden Ivey's injury. Somebody like that, I think, would make a ton of sense for them. Obviously, they have to also consider that Jaden Ivey will be back next season, and that this injury is not one that is typically associated with, long-term effects in terms of athleticism, in terms of him getting back to fully be his, incredibly athletic, springy, explosive self. So yes, like I'm in favor of them making a move. I'm in favor of them using their bevy of second round picks that they've accumulated recently to go out and try and find somebody that can potentially help them achieve their goals this year. Because again, if you look at where they are in the standings, they are a half game back of the Miami Heat for 6th in the Eastern Conference. Obviously, I think we all assume that at some point Orlando might be able to jump back ahead of them. But with the way that Milwaukee is playing right now, you just never know, even though they do have Giannis, and if Giannis was to get hurt for some reason, they could really, really fall off a cliff, I wonder. I would want to go and make a move because I think it is very valuable for Cade Cunningham and the rest of this young core to have playoff experience at the highest level, more so even than it is getting the difference between, I don't know, the 12th overall pick and the 16th or 17th overall pick in the draft.
Yeah, so I had Keith Smith on the podcast like a week and a half ago of Spot Track, and he spoke with us about, potential guys that the Pistons could be trying to acquire with their cap space, because they are the only team in the NBA with legit cap space left, around $14 million. And the name he kept bringing up was maybe they try to take on a few second-round picks, along with Pat Connaughton's contract. So there's a deal like that where obviously the Pistons, and Trajan's spoken about this a bit, the Pistons GM, about taking on salary just to get some future assets. And I think a lot of that was talked about before, the Pistons had a season that they're having right now. Like you mentioned, they've already won more games than Bryce has ever seen in the Pistons season. They've already smashed their over, which was at 24.5. And we just hit February. I don't think Trajan was expecting this. So it sounds like from what you're saying, if you were Trajan, you would not take on the Pat Connaughton or the guy who can't really play at anymore for a few second round picks. You would rather go and get someone like Alonzo Ball or another name that I've seen the Pistons community bring up, and I'd like to get your thoughts on is maybe take on the 2-year contract of CJ McCollum from the Pelicans, see what that would look like. Or do you think that would interfere too much with Jaden Ivey when he would return next year?
Yeah, I mean, like, to speak to the idea that Keith brought up first, right? Like, why not do both? Right? Like, you have the 14 million in cap space or whatever. Like, you probably couldn't do McCollum and take on the Connaughton deal, right? But you could use the Simone.
Oh, I think we lost Sam for a minute there. So we'll be right back. We'll be right back as soon as he gets back in here. I'll edit this up. Oh, he's right back. Actually, we don't have to. I won't edit it back up. Go ahead. Go ahead with what you were saying.
That's on my fault. That's my bad. Yeah, so like you can use the Simone Fontecchio deal potentially to use in salary matching for somebody else that makes sense, right? And take on the Connaughton deal and still like go out and get your assets and buy now. Like because they have this cap space, it doesn't have to be a one or the other, in my opinion. It can be, hey, we want to do this one thing. We can also go do this other thing too. Now, if it's CJ McCollum that you want to go and do, I think CJ has played really, really well this year. So if they want to go like really in and just decide, hey, we're doing CJ, we want to make sure that we make at least like the double knockout version of the play-in tournament, right? And be a top 8 seed. I don't really have a problem with them going out and getting CJ. I will say that I'm not like 100% convinced that it's worth taking on his like $30 million next season necessarily, given that Jaden Ivey is going to be back. And I really appreciated the way Jaden Ivey played this season. I do think that all of Jaden, Cade, and CJ would probably struggle to play like at the defensive level that JB Bickerstaff clearly really wants them to play at. And, what JB has kind of tried to instill in terms of what he hopes their identity can be moving forward this season. But like, if you get CJ's contract, you do open yourself up to him being on an expiring this offseason. And, you could try and, maybe make a move to take on like a longer term guy that, the team's trying to get off of that maybe is a little bit of a better fit. Right. But where they can just use the space they would have to be able to do that. Right. It's complicated. Like I would depend on the price tag, I think, for me with CJ. If they went out and did it, I wouldn't crush it though by any means, because I don't think the contract is so onerous that you can't get off of him as an expiring deal if you really needed to. And I do think he would genuinely help them as a secondary shot creator, as just an offensive force next to Cade. And I think they could really use that. And I don't think it would hinder their long-term plans at all, because his contract does expire before, potential extensions for Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Jalen Duren, everyone like that kind of comes into play. So it's a fine deal to me if they want to go out and do it, but I would understand them wanting to stay flexible too.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of moves that we're going to see the Pistons kind of operate in. I'm interested to see what happens. But like you mentioned at the end there, taking on a contract, I don't see them going after one of the big fishes or getting involved in anything crazy that has long-term money tied to it. But like I mentioned, like with the CJ, like you mentioned, a guy that has 2 years left in his contract, expires before the extensions really start to kick in. You have that flexibility next year in the trade market. Someone like that can really help this team, because, I mean, I'm sure you and Bryce have talked about it. The secondary creation on this team is non-existent. The non-Cade minutes are absolutely horrific. And if they want to be a team that tries to get to that 6th seed, I mean, right now they're 25-25. They're a half game behind the Heat for the 6th seed, and we know what's going on with Miami and the whole Jimmy Butler, so they're probably going to fall. I mean, and the Pistons, I feel like they probably feel like, I know Milwaukee has Giannis, but they're only a game, 2 games behind them, a 1 win behind them. I know they have to feel like at least Cade and everyone in the locker room feels like, if we play well, we can win our games. We can move up this thing. So I think if they want to try and make some noise relative to what their expectations were this year, then yeah, I think going out and getting a second grader is a must. But I know how badly Trajan really wants to add assets because of Troy Weaver being so bad at his job for the last 4 years. So I completely understand it, but we'll leave it there. Coming back though,
real quick though, before we move past this, like another name that they could look at that would give them secondary creation, like that they could also do while probably taking on like an additional asset. Like, would Memphis do Luke Kennard and John Concher, and then like you take on a second rounder as well for taking on the Concher contract, right? Like Luke Kennard, I think, is a really underrated secondary creator. Obviously, he doesn't bring the defensive intensity that you like, but like Luke is one of the best shooters in NBA history. I think he's a little bit underrated on the ball. And then you take the Concher deal. It's not like Concher can't play, but it's not a contract that teams around the league are excited to potentially take on. I think there are like small ways that you could potentially look at doing both, I guess, would be my point.
I think Pistons fans would really like hearing that. I've had a few listeners actually reach out and say, what about former Piston Luke? And I think that for Pistons fans, you don't have to tell them that he has a little bit of on-ball creation. There was a lot of Pistons fans during his time here that begged him to just do more with the ball, just be more aggressive, shoot the ball more. And I know he's become a really, really great shooter, like you mentioned, but I think Luke would fit nice. I think Pistons fans would welcome him back. They really liked him during his time in Detroit. So I know his family really likes Detroit as well. So we'll see what happens. Coming up, though, I want to talk with Sam about Cade Cunningham's season. He's playing absolutely spectacular, made his first All-Star team. We'll get Sam's thoughts when we come back. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listing. And for someone like me, I'm a procrastinator. I wait to the last second with just about everything I do, and it often screws me over when it comes to buying tickets. I get the worst pricing. I get the worst tickets possible. It screwed me over all the time. But with Game Time Picks, I'm saved. It gives me last-minute deals all the way up to the last minute, even after the event has already started. And one of the favorite things I love about Game Time is that you can see your seat from within the app. So you don't have to wait till you get to the event, find out if you got the right seats, get there, now you're upset. No, you see the seat right within the Game Time app. You know if the seat is right for you and if the price is best for you. You're also covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. We're just 400 subscribers away from 10,000. That's our goal by the end of the year. If you help me get there, I really would appreciate it. Also, we've been streaming over on Playback the Piston games. Last few games has been a lot of fun. Had a lot of you guys in there. If you want to join us the next one on Wednesday, I'll link it down below for you guys to join the room and be ready for Wednesday's game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. All right, so Cade Cunningham has made an all-star team for the first time this year. He's really showcasing why he was the number 1 overall pick 4 years ago. He's getting incredible push across the league. I mean, you're seeing him tweeted about by the NBA account, the ESPN account, SportsCenter account. You saw him on TNT. You saw him doing interviews on ESPN. Like, there's been a massive national push for Cade because of how he's played this year. I think Pistons fans obviously very much respect and appreciate that, getting some respect and some eyeballs on them. But I want to talk with you, Sam, about just how good do you think Cade's been this year? He's averaging 25.5 a game, 9.5 assists, 6.3 rebounds, shooting splits 45, 35, and 84. He's getting his free throw percentage back up to where we usually expected it at. His overall efficiency is really around where it's been last year, around 55 true shooting percentage, but been more impactful defensively. Just Sam, where do you feel like Cade is at right now this season?
Yeah, it was funny. So obviously after Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson won the right to start in the All-Star game, it felt like there were 4 slots for guards because the front court players were a little bit weaker. All due respect to, Pascal Siakam, Jalen Brown, Evan Mobley, the guys that did make the All-Star game, they're totally worthy and incredibly uh, terrific picks for All-Star, right? It felt like there were 4 slots for 7 players in All-Star, right? It was Cade Cunningham, Darius Garland, Tyler Hero, Trae Young, Damian Lillard, LaMelo Ball, and Tyrese Halliburton, really. Halliburton obviously had the really tough start to the year. He's since turned it on and has been enormous for the Pacers, but I felt like the tough start to the year kind of like pushed him to 7th among that group. LaMelo Ball has missed a lot of time, played, I think, 27, 28 games so far this year, maybe 30. I think he's missed like 13, 14 games or whatever. So he was kind of easier for me to like also narrow out. So really it came down to like 4 players for 5 spots. And honestly, among that group, I thought the 2 very obvious picks that you had to have were Cade Cunningham and Darius Garland. And that speaks to how good Cade has been this season. He is just a total monster with the ball in his hand. And like you said before, when we were talking about Jaden Ivey, like everything that teams do is so predicated upon stopping Cade Cunningham, right? Everything that teams have to do is just continue to try and crowd the lane so that when he drives, there are multiple bodies trying to like poke at the ball like we've seen the past few years. Now, the difference is that, Cade has always had the supercomputer brain to be able to figure out the way defenses are playing to him, adjust. He's tightened the handle, I think, a little bit to be able to not get stripped as often whenever he goes into those tight areas. And then the shooting around him has really helped, obviously, as well. Having guys like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias Harris that really get guarded out there. Like, even if Tobias Harris maybe hasn't had like some incredible season this season, he is a player that gets guarded from the 3-point line. Whereas the last couple of years, there were just players out there that don't get guarded. Like Isaiah Stewart, even when he was shooting 40% from 3, didn't get guarded behind the 3-point line, right? Like teams were happy to let him shoot, even though he was making them. So I think that's been a really big help with Cade. Also, like the place I've noticed the most growth with him, just frankly, is defensively. He's been so much better defensively this season than what he has been in his first 3 seasons. The effort, the attention to detail, the intensity, it just has been a lot better, in my opinion, this year. And I think that is just a credit to him. He's always been a dude, like going back to, when he was in high school, then at Oklahoma State, always been like an incredibly, high level human being, great attention to detail. You've never had to worry about like anything with him whatsoever. And he's a real leader. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about having to worry if he's going to bring it every night in big spots. Like he's going to do that. And I think that now that there's a team around him that makes sense, that is competently built, you see how successful he can be. And like, it's funny, like Cade's a guy that I just like genuinely never wavered on in terms of him being like a star. I felt great about him, continuing to at some point I thought maybe like he might just be a borderline all NBA player after last season, as opposed to being, what he's been immediately this season, where I would just have him all NBA. But, he's a tremendous, tremendous basketball player. And like having somebody like him is, allows the Pistons a lot of grace in terms of being able to build around him.
So there was a few different ways I wanted to take the conversation, and you said a few really interesting things. So I'm just going to pick one. You mentioned all NBA. So there's been a lot of talk, obviously, over the last few years because of the new requirements for all NBA. Obviously, you have to play 65 games. That eliminates a lot of players. Do you think that? I mean, at the beginning of the year, I was talking with his trainer Ashton, and he was talking about, me and him were talking like, we're talking All-Star right now. When does the noise start becoming all NBA? Like when does All-Star already get secured and we're starting to talk about, hey, he deserves all NBA this year? And obviously Ashton, he feels like all NBA should obviously be in the book. But Where do you feel like all NBA legit is in his sight this year, or what would have to happen? Do the Pistons have to get the 6th seed? Do they have to move up? Like, how close is he to being an all NBA guy this year?
Oh, if the Pistons get the 6th seed, he should be all NBA. Like I'm not even gonna. I will quarter no like arguments otherwise. Like if this team that was just like truly egregiously bad for the last few years makes all NBA or makes the 6th seed this year after winning freaking 14 games last year, because Cade Cunningham like has a full season and because the roster around him is more competent, but like, I mean, look, like Tobias Harris is averaging 13 points a game. Jaden Ivey is going to end up missing like the last 50 games of the year. I mean, like Malik Beasley's played great. Tim Hardaway Jr. has been up and down, I guess is like the fairest way to put it. And like, it's not like Jalen Duren is drastically better on defense than he's been before, right? Isaiah Stewart's been great this year defensively, but like, I don't see how you would like be able to make a case against it if they make the top 6. Even so, like, even if they're 7th or 8th in the East, he's going to have a real case for it regardless. I mean, this dude is averaging 25 points, 6.3 rebounds. He's second in the league in assists at 9.5. I know the turnovers are an issue, but he's tasked with so much for them offensively. And oh, by the way, their offense is not like a train wreck. Like they're sitting here, 17th in the league at the time of us talking, despite the fact that it's really just like Cade and a few shooters around him. And then like Jalen's a good rim runner, obviously, as well. But like there aren't a lot of options here. And he's still just carrying them to a top 20 offense in the NBA. I really think all NBA like should be a discussion for Cade Cunningham right now. When we did midseason all NBA, Bryce and I think I had Cade 3rd team and I felt like good about it, honestly. Like I there are arguments for other players. I certainly won't deny that, but I felt quite good about having him 3rd team All NBA.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, the fact that we talked about this in the episode a few days ago that the fact that Cade and this team all they have are really like you mentioned just shooters around him. They don't have any shot creation. They don't have secondary creation. The team goes to bleep when he goes to the bench, and still the team is operating around a 16th, 17th offense. Really, this is like a team that should be bottom 5 offense with the type of shot creation they have. All they have is shooters, and Cade's kind of carrying them to being a league average offense. And then, like you mentioned earlier, this team had the 3rd best defense in January. They're continuing to get better defensively, and he is a guy that's maybe I don't want to say spearheading it, but he's certainly contributing to a lot of it as well. Getting the return of Ausar Thompson obviously helps, but he's taking a big jump defensively. He's carrying them offensively. So, he's a legit two-way guy. JB talked about getting that out of him in the offseason, and you're seeing that. I think if he could just get his efficiency a little bit up, then I don't think it would be even an argument. But we needed that rim finishing to come around. Maybe turn some of those rim finishing, some of those layups into some floaters, some runners, some hook shots, those sweeping hooks he likes, instead of taking some contested shots at the rim. Also get a better whistle. He's still not even averaging 5 free throws a game. So I think that could all help him. But I think the only thing holding him is the efficiency. But like you mentioned, if they get to the 6th seed after winning 14 games last year, man, it's like, come on. Like, how can you deny that? But is there anything else you want to hit on before we move on?
Yeah, no, the last thing I was going to say is I'm glad you brought up the finishing. Like to me, it's a little bit more about the footwork. I think that like his gathers tend to be a little bit like arrhythmic almost at times. And it feels like it kind of throws off like I don't even know if it's like his balance or whatever it is. I feel like he doesn't get the most out of his length and like his strides. He's a dude with like long arms, has long strides when he wants to actually utilize those long strides. I think that it's really just like a summer of him getting in the gym with like his trainers, the guys that he's comfortable with, and them just like kind of working on, okay, let's like really nail down around the basket, like multiple counters to the way that rim protectors are going to show you. Like, in this circumstance, we need to like hit a slow step, Euro step, like boom. We need to, in another circumstance, we need to really extend out that final stride and be able to like use an inside hand finish to be able to get all the way to the basket using your 7-foot wingspan to your advantage, right? It's just going to be little tricks of the trade like that to me. Like I like what they do a lot of the time, like using him like empty side of the court, like post up opportunities, right? Like those things often end up really fun. And I think that those ones end up with him sometimes creating easier shots around the basket as well, which again could go toward like what the spacing angle could look like for him at some point, if they can even, add another, super high level player that teams have to be cognizant of at all times on the court. So I think the finishing is going to come. Like, I'm not as concerned. Like, it's not good right now. And I totally agree with you that it's the thing that is holding him back as much as anything else. But I think that will come. Like, I don't think this is a long-term flaw for him. I think that he will figure this out.
And I think every Pistons fans hopes it does. Like you mentioned with the post-ups real quick, the touch he has from the 4 to 7 foot range on floaters and that hook shot he likes to go to out of the post-up is like elite. It's like the elite of elite touch from that area. Seems like he lacks that touch a little bit at the rim, but it could be, like you mentioned, just the footwork and his strides on the way to the rim. I mean, I know there's another player in this young core that struggles with that, and maybe we get to him when we come back. I want to ask Sam about the Pistons young core moving forward and how it looks over the next few years. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags that we should avoid, but what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships? Those green flags. If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists at any time, you can do so at any time for no extra cost. Therapy provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. I'm getting frustrated with my camera that keeps freezing. I don't know why. But I want to thank you guys again. Like I said, hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Join us on Wednesday in the Playback Room. Watch the Pistons game live with me, the rest of the Pistons fan base, the rest of the Locked On Pistons community as well. I'll link that down below for you. All right, so Sam, we don't got much time, so I want to get this question out quick. Pistons young core. There's a lot of interesting talent. I've talked to a lot of people over the last year and a half or so, and a lot of people feel like, at least outside Detroit, that the Pistons have a lot of talent from individual players, but a lot of people seem to question the fit of all of them together. I just want to know, where are you at with the team's overall young core? Are there guys that maybe they should be looking to move on from? Should they be holding on to all of these guys? Can they all fit together? Can they all play together eventually? Just where are you at with this young core?
Yeah, I think I've probably been one of the loudest voices complaining about the fit of the players within the young core. So let's start here. I have interest in like generally like almost all of these players in a vacuum, like by themselves, right? I am a big Jaden Ivey fan. Like, I think Ivey just has some real incredible athletic juice that it's very, very hard to find. And just the way that he's grown in terms of being able to slow down. Like, I remember the first half of his rookie season. I mean, holy hell, like it just felt like things were moving at 125 mile an hour around him, and he was also trying to play at that speed because he's capable of playing at that speed, and it just like didn't work out, unfortunately for him. But you even started to see it a little bit throughout the back half of his rookie season, where he was like, okay, I need to slow down a little bit. I thought this year, like, you really started to see the patience more than anything improve with Jaden, and you could see the level to which he started to understand how to utilize his speed, how to utilize his athleticism, how to go slow to fast, or even just like medium to fast in his case is oftentimes enough, right? So I'm a big Jaden Ivey fan, and I've always been a huge fan of the Jaden fit next to Cade, because I've loved the idea of the fact that I think that at some point he's going to shoot. Obviously, he made 40% of his threes in the 30 games before he got hurt. And on top of it, I've always loved the idea of like utilizing like different kind of like stampede cuts, 45 cuts, using his athleticism to get downhill, allowing him to play as the second side creator and attack closeouts off of Cade, who's always going to have the ball in his hands. Like, I always really liked that idea and liked that fit with Ivey being able to play in that way. I think he can be a 20-point per game scorer, like just doing those things, playing off of Cade. Ausar is probably the player I like the most next. I'm like just fascinated with him in general. He is unfortunately just often going to be compared to a man, and he is as explosive as a men in a straight line. But the difference between those two athletically has always been that like a men is just a little bit more flexible as an athlete than what Ausar is. And that allows him, and he's just had better ball skills as well. Like that allows a men to get into those like crazy tight creases. And I've always thought he's a little bit more sudden than Ausar is too. It allows him to get into those tight creases and like really be able to play on the ball and be like a potential primary on ball creator at some point. That's why I had a men, I think at 3 or 4 on my board, and had Ausar at like 9 or 10, if I remember. I think I had him at 9 maybe on my board when they drafted him. And I still have a lot of questions about Ausar. Like I'm gonna do a video breakdown of Ausar next week on my YouTube channel, and it's figuring out how to space around him is going to be the key, because teams still just really do not guard him, and he still hasn't yet totally figured out how to best take advantage of that at all times. Like he is an aggressive cutter in a way that is really useful, but again, like you have to be like crazy aggressive as a cutter, and you have to really honestly probably have a big man like an Alperen Şengün who can pass the ball in order to like take best advantage of that. Like a man is not a great shooter, but he has Fred VanVleet, one of the best passers, decision makers in the league next to him. And he also has Alperen Şengün, one of the best big man passers in the league next to him. So that when they run their 1-5 ball screen, right? Okay, let's say it's Fred who's coming downhill. Help man comes off of a men, Fred's going to hit him. Okay, let's say they put 2 on the ball and ball screens. You've got Fred, having to throw a safety valve release to Alperen in the middle of the court. Okay, help man comes up off of a men dives to the rim. Alperen's also going to be able to hit him, right? Jalen Duren, some of the other guys on the team, like they don't really do that quite as successfully as a lot of the guys on the Rockets do. So I think that a big key for me with Ausar getting the most out of what he's capable of offensively is going to be having the right teammates, the right playmakers around him. I'm not like much of a believer in either of the Thompson twins ever being able to shoot off pull-ups, maybe some catch and shoot stuff, but I don't know if they're ever going to get guarded out there in the way you would hope. I think a men's ball skills in transition I think Ausar's ball skills in transition this year actually have kind of showcased themselves pretty nicely at times. And that's a place where he can be just absolutely damaging and an enormous threat. And defensively, like part of the reason I'm focusing on the offense is like we know what he is on defense. He's an absolute terror. He has every chance to make an all defense team at some point in his career, as long as the offense doesn't hold him back from getting minutes on the court. So I think Ausar is probably the guy like next in this group. I'm not quite as big of a Jalen Duren guy. I know he's been quite good recently. Obviously, this like little, what is it, like a 10-game stretcher or whatever, where he's averaging like feels like 15 and 15 or something like that, right? Like he's just been really, really good as we're talking. But it's the defense for me that drives me crazy, like the flat-footedness on defense, the lack of engagement that you often see in ball screens. It just feels. He feels like, and this is what annoyed me a little bit about him pre-draft as well, he feels like a little bit of a relic of like an Andre Drummond style big to a past era. And, those guys are definitely NBA players. Mark Williams, by the way, in Charlotte, like he's often compared with Mark Williams. I know Mark just had like a monster game, honestly, I think yesterday or 2 days ago or whatever, and then had another one last week where he dropped like 38 or whatever. But if you actually watch the tape of those games, like Mark Williams is just as bad on defense as Jalen Duren is, and honestly might be worse a lot of the time. So it's not like there was like a better pick if they wanted to fill the center spot necessarily in that draft. To me, like they might extend Jalen Duren. I don't know what their decision is actually going to be, but I probably wouldn't at this point. I would want to know more about where his defense is going to get to over the course of the next, really 2.5 months, I guess, at this point, and potentially into the playoffs. Like, I really worry he's a player that teams will be able to attack in the playoffs because he doesn't shoot it. And also, he's not a super high level ball screen defender. He has all the tools to do it, needs to be able to actually do it now. We're in year 3. You got to showcase that you can do it consistently. And then Ron Holland's an interesting player too. Like, Ron is obviously just a super high motor, super high energy, high engagement dude. I love his mentality. I love his motor. I love his effort. I love how engaged he is at all times. Just needs, they have so much time with him. Like, he needs to be able to continue to improve the skill set, continue to improve as a shooter, continue to improve, all across the board in terms of just the overall skill set that he brings to the table. Good player, like, that I think will be valuable for somebody. But the last 3 guys that we mentioned here are all non-shooters at this point, and it's just really hard to have 3 guys in the core around Cade Cunningham that are just like total non-entities as shooters right now. So, look, if it was me, I would have made different decisions on draft night, and I would have, again, like, it's not about not liking the players involved. I actually think that all of the players have traits that are really intriguing. It's that I don't know how they all work together with Cade, unfortunately, because we've seen how the non-shooting can affect Cade's game at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think all of that is pretty spot on. I would be, just to give you before you leave out, where I would have them ranked. I have Ausar. Ausar is I feel the best about Ausar. I'd have him top. Now I'd probably have Ron or Ivy next. Swap either one of those, and then Duren at the bottom. Duren, for the
Yeah.
exact same reason you were talking about defensively, it's just been too. It's hard to build a good defense around a big man who is struggling that much on defense, and the ball skills have been too inconsistent the last year or so for him. So I'd have Duren at the bottom, even though, like you mentioned, he has looked pretty good over the last week and a half or so. Ivy, the thing just real quickly, the thing, if you look at Cade and Ausar the last month since the start of January, they actually have a plus 0.3 net rating when they're on the floor together. And it's a large part because of, obviously, their defense just soars when Ausar is on the floor. They have a 111.2 defensive rating, but then they're getting by defensively, or offensively, I should say, because of how good Cade's been. I'm one of those guys who believes in Ausar's secondary creation. I think the only reason why you do draft him 5 is if you believe he has that secondary playmaking that he had at OTE. If you don't believe that, he falls. But if you believe in it, you draft him 5 and utilize it. And they utilized it in this game against Atlanta. He looked really good doing it. If he can do that, I think he has a high ceiling. My overall point of bringing it up is I was just talking with Bryce a few weeks ago about this. I was talking to a few other Piston guys that one of the best ways probably to move forward, at least in my opinion, of building around Cade is utilizing. I don't know if they're ever going to be like a top 5 offense. I don't know if Cade's ever going to be a top 5 offensive player or something like that, like a Luka or Jokic. What I do think that they could do that would be unique to them is Cade gives you that size versatility on defense to where if you really wanted to, and you've seen it a little bit when they can over the last month, is you can run a lineup out there of Cade and Ausar at the 1 and 2, and then no one's on the floor is smaller than 6'6", 6'7".
Sure.
You're switchable across the board. You can't get picked on defensively. You have a guy like Ausar that can just wreck defenses or wreck teams' offenses. And Cade's been as impactful as he has a defender, especially as a help side rim protector. I feel like that's where they could really get unique at, and that's why I just get a little confused about what they're going to do long term, because obviously Ivy wouldn't fit into that. But Ivy, like you said, had played really well this year. Do you really want to move off him because of something like that? I think is really interesting, but I think a lot of what you said obviously is on point.
Well, and to your point, like, the thing that we have to remember is, like, Trajan Langdon did not draft any of these guys outside of Ron Holland, and I guess Bobby Klintman too, if we want to bring him up. But, like, Trajan Langdon, like, doesn't have the connection to these players that some other, the past regime would have. So if he has a vision for how he wants to build, and if that vision is similar to yours, and by the way, like, I really like Jaden Ivey. If they decided they wanted to move off of him because they think that they want to stay flexible and try and find like a second star next to Cade, and they don't believe that Ivy is like the second star, I totally respect that. And, like, I understand that. Like, that wouldn't be out of this world crazy to me if they decided to go down your pathway. But if they do want to go down your pathway, I actually do think they need to move Duren and Ivey this summer then. Like if that's the plan, you do have to have a plan and you do have to stick to it at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be Nico Harrison losing his mind and having a plan about the defense and trading Luka Doncic. But like, all due respect to Jaden Ivey, a player that I genuinely love and think like is going to be a 9-figure player in the NBA. Like, if you have a vision and Jaden Ivey does not quite fit into that vision, I also don't know that Jaden Ivey is so good that you have to retain him long term. Right. So if you feel like you could go out and get, a guy that fits your vision more, plus a draft pick for a young team that like really wants a flyer, like if Utah would be willing to get like really likes Jaden Ivey and would be willing to give you like a super high level draft asset plus something else, I'm intrigued by that. Like that's one that's like really interesting to me. But you have to now that Cade is this good, and I'm sure this is the way the Pistons are thinking, they have to figure out what exactly they want to do around him. It can't be just like a haphazard, set of choices. And unfortunately for Pistons fans, those decisions get difficult this summer because of the potential Duren and Ivey extensions. I mean, like I don't envy Trajan Langdon and everybody involved in that front office for having to make these choices, because they aren't going to be the easiest choices necessarily. But what they need to do and what they've done, I think, really, really well throughout the course of this year so far, hopefully throughout the rest of this year, is learn what works best around Cade and then kind of try to build a team around it that way.
All right. Appreciate you and all your insight, man. We'll let you go now. We're at 41 minutes. Didn't mean to run along there, but I just want to get my thoughts in there at the end there. Sorry about that. But I appreciate you coming on. You guys can find Sam's work obviously over at The Athletic. You can follow him and Bryce's podcast over Game Theory Podcast. You can follow him over on Twitter at Sam_Vicini as well. I appreciate you coming on here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Till next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Till next time, peace out, everybody.